Hello, writers! We are doing something a little different today. Drum roll, please. Announcing the Bleeder's Best Writing Advice Anthology #1. Woo! So we have had 13 writers on the show thus far, and some of the things that they have said have really stuck with me and changed my process for the better. So in today's episode, I am going to share my favorite takeaways from this summer. Honestly, this could be considered porn to some people.
Yes! 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 Yes!
There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed. Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books. So let's kick things off with our debut guest, Samantha Allen, who set the perfect tone right out of the gate. Tip number 1, treat your work as the worthy feast that it is. You do not have to publish your most intimate shit online.
I do feel like even still, like, online writing is devalued. People expect to be able to read it for free between banner ads for fragrances. Mm-hmm. And then it just lives there forever and anyone can see it. And there's no barrier of investment, by which I mean people haven't taken that kind of volitional step of this is a story I want to access. Let me walk in the door of this. Online writing just attacks you from algorithms, and point being that's why I always, was holding stuff back. For me to tell stories like that, I want to do it in a way that feels valued, in a way where it feels like it's getting a showcase, and in a way where it feels like it's being treated as a meal and not as a snack.
Ah, yes. A paywall is a beautiful thing, or save it for your book, honey. I also love this advice from Samantha. What piece of writing advice do you wish you could give your former self?
I would say be weirder, a book like Patricia Wants to Cuddle feels closer to who I am, but I sort of felt like I had to put my most respectable foot forward, and part of that was strategy, but part of that was, I think, a lack of self-confidence on my part. And with Patricia Wants to Cuddle, I was threw caution to the wind and was just I'm gonna be my weird little self. I don't care what you think about me making a hyper violent, reality show, dark horror comedy. This is me. Yeah.
I love it. Let your freak flag fly, especially on the page. And day jobs often get a bad rap, but Halley Sutton talked about the benefits of having a day job as a writer.
I mean, I think it's everybody's appetite is different. I am somebody who, if I'm making insane Stephen King money, sure. But the idea of relying on my creativity, writing my books as my sole source of income, the way that can go can be so feast or famine that's an idea that at this point still really scares me. So it's really having a day job is both about having kind of consistency and having a routine, but it's also, in some ways, I still see it as freeing me up to be as creatively weird as I would like to be, because I'm not having to write specifically to an audience and going, I know this will sell. Another murder mystery about I looked out the back window and my husband was murdering the babysitter. I don't want to write, those books are great. There's nothing wrong with those books, but I don't want to ever write to a thing that I feel is a trend necessarily. I want to write the books that I want to write. So a day job at this point is very necessary.
I love that reframing of a day job as not a burden, but a freedom. She also gave us a good reminder about accepting those shitty first drafts. What piece of writing advice do you wish you could give your former self?
Well, it's a piece I'm also still giving myself now currently, which is first drafts are bad. They're always going to be bad, and you just have to get through it. I really think that a big part of writing is like being able to endure the terrible first draft to just get to the point where you're making it better and it starts to feel like something you love. Because for so long, particularly with the second book, it just was like, felt so bad, and all you can do is just sit there and tinker with it and make it better. But like you have to keep working on it. Otherwise you can fix anything but the blank page. And so I have to keep reminding myself of that over and over and over.
You're going to hear versions of this tip come up again throughout this episode, but Halley stressed the importance of community. What's one tip for writers trying to get a book published?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to the tip I said before about building your community, but like really that's true. And that's true in like a very feel-good way about the things it'll do for your creativity. But it's also true in terms of you don't know who might be able to like hook you up with an agent. And it might be that like particular nudge of saying like recommending it from somebody that like helps you go to the front of the pile, helps you get better eyes on your work. It could be the people you reach out to when you do publish your book and they're the ones who will read it and give you a blurb for your back cover. Just building your network. So much of publishing feels out of your hands when you're querying or when you're on submission. And it can be like such a beat down to just sit there watching your inbox all day. But like something you can concretely do is reach out to people on Twitter or Instagram or find ways to make connections, especially if you can do that out of like genuine admiration and passion for what somebody is doing and not in kind of like a usury sick. Yeah, exactly. But like, if it's like, I really loved this book, well, then send her a note on Twitter or an email or something, you know, just like be really genuine about it. But I think that that's a really, it'll at least make you feel like you're doing something while you're in the big wait.
Everyone is so desperate to get a literary agent, but Chloe Caldwell offers an example of an agent relationship gone wrong.
So I had sent her a draft of the Red Zone and I was waiting and waiting and waiting for her notes and waiting and really excited. And finally it's like a Friday at 6 p.m. and I'm like, do you have the notes? And she said she'd get them by the end of the day. She said, yeah, I'm scanning them in. And then the notes came in and there was like 5 notes on like a 250 page manuscript. There was just nothing. And I couldn't believe it. And from there, I just thought, again, it's so hard to make these choices as a writer. You're like, oh, should I hang on? This person's going to get me money. You know, I should like, maybe I'm just a shitty writer. The book's really shitty. But I just didn't feel like, I felt like something was being unsaid. So the great thing about agents is that you can end your relationship with them really easily by putting it in an email, putting it in writing. So I emailed and I said, I don't think this is working out for me, but thank you. And then she admitted, yeah, I didn't have a vision for the book. And I was like, why didn't you tell me? I was thinking, why didn't you tell me that earlier?
And the remedy is, oh yeah, you can fire your agent if it's not working. Chloe also gave us a reframe on what publishing success looks like.
Don't have fixed ideas of where you need to get the book published. It's really, if you're flexible and have an open mind to presses that aren't just Random House and Simon and Schuster, you'll be able to get a book published. But if you're stuck in that is success and other small presses aren't success and you're looking at it that way, it's going to hurt you.
I would guess almost everyone listening to this guilt trips himself about taking time off. But Amanda McNeil talked about the benefits of taking a break.
I just sat on it. And I think that actually ended up being really good because now the material has some distance. So when I read it, I kind of forget that like I wrote a lot of it. It feels like a different person wrote it. So I can really be more objective with myself and be like, well, this is boring, or like, I'm just less attached to the material.
And she reminded us that the biggest difference between essay collections and memoirs is marketing.
I've read so many essay collections that read like a memoir or memoirs that read like essay collections to where I'm like, there's not really a difference here. Like, it's just marketing really is what it is. Unless it's, an essay collection that focuses on like pop culture or like certain things like that. Then I'm like, okay, that makes it different. That's harder to put a memoir spin on it. But other than that, I'm like, it's the same shit. Like, it's like calling some novels women's fiction. Like, it's fiction. It's the same thing. This is like just a way to market it differently.
I loved this book writing mental hack from Hannah Howard. I've honestly thought about this so many times since that episode. It's just bird by bird, 1,000 word essay at a time. That's it. That's all book writing is.
As I was feeling daunted by this big, I think my contract said 60,000 words. I believe Feast is like 75,000 words, which is pretty much like a medium-sized book. It just sounds like a lot of words, 75,000 words. But I was really good at writing 1,000-word essays. So I told myself I just have to write 75 1,000-word essays. And of course, that's not exactly it.
That's
but
a good hack, though, mentally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hannah also offered this keep it simple, stupid reminder that I really needed about story structure.
I think I was a Bennington professor who was like, when all else fails, like just chronological order is a brilliant thing. Like that's how we usually tell stories. Like this happened and then that happened and then this happened. So while there are other ways to tell a story for sure, especially when if you're writing like essays or something like that, there's a reason it's kind of the first. And I think it often really works. And it really did work for me.
Bridgette Bianca talked about using live readings as a workshop venue.
Since I didn't have a formal workshop like space anymore, I wasn't involved in any big workshops. Really, it was, people would invite me to read at a place or come to an event, and I would write a piece for that event. And I would practice the piece, over and over again and kind of perfect it in my mind. And not just how it sounded, what it looked like on the page. And then I realized, this is my workshop experience.
She also offered this nugget of wisdom that we all need to hear from time to time. As an English teacher, what's one thing about writing that you hope to impart, one little piece of wisdom you hope to impart on your students?
Oh my goodness. So I teach mostly compositions. I don't teach the fun stuff all the time, but I teach them that all writing is worthy. And I think that sounds like so hunky-dory, all writing is worthy, but no, really, even if you aren't the best writer in this moment, or you're not saying the perfect thing in this moment, it's still worthy. It's still worth writing. It's still worth reading, still worth critiquing, revising, revisiting, right? Sometimes we write things, it's like, well, that was done. It's over. No, it's worthy. Go back to it, make it better, or change it. You change your mind, right? Add more to it, revise, add an addendum, whatever it is. All writing is worthy, even if it's not the fanciful poetry that you read in school or the best short story ever. I have a friend who writes fanfic, kind of smutty, really great. And we talk often about people, oh, well, fanfic isn't real writing. I'm like, no, all writing is worthy, right? So I try to teach my students the same thing. And so then they tell me what they're writing besides the essays I assigned to them, which are still worthy. And I'm like, yes, please keep writing that. That's still worthy. It's still worth your time, even if no one sees it, which is the part that I think we forget about. Is I share poetry weekly, right? I share poetry all the time, and people always hear it, and you think that's what makes the poetry worthy, but it's not, right? It was worthy when it was just in my notebook, or when I was in the 6th grade and passing my little short story around. It was always worthy. So to remind them of that, I think is really important.
Bridgette was on fire during this interview. She was dropping all kinds of truth. So I have to share these final takeaways that she left us with. What is one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
Ooh, I thought about this long and hard. I came up with a 3-word answer. Okay.
Oh.
Fuck everybody else. That is my answer. That's the advice I would give myself, because I gave a lot of fucks about other people back in the day. And if I had just known, fuck everybody else, things would have gone so much better for me.
Yes.
And now I'd have to remember that. And I need to put a sticky note behind me. Fuck everybody. Or I'll make it a little bit more parent friendly. Forget everybody else on the wall behind me so I can remember.
That is a good one. What's one tip for writers trying to get a book published?
Talk to your community. Really make community. Don't just float in and float out of the lit scene, whatever it is. Really invest yourself in knowing people, because that's how I got a book deal, right? I was invested in my craft and in my community. I wasn't the most active and talkative person. I'm an introvert still, but I was present with my work, and I showed up with it every time, and people knew me for my work. And that made it a lot easier to catch the attention of publishers or friends or whoever. So writ large, snapped me up, but they weren't the only person to ask me for my book, right? And so the idea is that people met me through my work, and that is the biggest thing. So if you want to get a book deal, get the work out there. Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid. Yes. Don't be afraid. Chelsea Martin is one of my favorite writers, and she has been so prolific, and I am just eternally inspired by her just go for it DIY approach to publishing. You did a ton of stuff by yourself though, so like, I guess, do you have any tips on that other than just like go for it? Like send the email without thinking that hard about it? Or
I mean, that is advice I give a lot of just email the publishers you like it can't hurt. They'll always like that, and you could possibly form a connection that could be really cool. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. And I think doing it yourself is cool, and I think self-publishing is cool. And I don't think people should be afraid of that.
What's one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
So I think I would tell myself, like, as far as publishing, to just be more patient. And like with Mickey, I feel like I was just kind of scared that no one was going to publish it. And so I went with Curbside out of fear, and it backfired a lot. And I think I would tell myself to be patient and let things sit a little longer.
I love it. So Chelsea shared her thoughts on perfectionism versus being prolific, and you're going to hear it in a second, but I thought about this for literally weeks after our interview.
I think there's like two kinds of people who are like really in a hurry to publish, and people who want everything to be perfect and have their perfect publisher and their perfect huge advance and just wait forever for that. And so I think like kind of trying to avoid both of those extremes and just doing the best thing that you can do for yourself in a reasonable amount of time, and then moving on to your next project and like moving on with your life.
Emmy Olea shared what kind of cool opportunities can come out of just allowing your book to find a new format.
When I finished writing the book, I started writing the book proposal. I started collecting testimonials from friends. I got a testimonial from Robert Morse, Russell Brand, my friend Beck Cohen. I got a testimonial. I had met Russell through mutual friends. And so we just kind of had a little bit of rapport. And I shared with him that I was writing a book. He had gifted me one of his books. And so that's how it just started. And then I asked my friend Utkarsh Ambudkar to write a testimonial for me. He's also an actor. And he called me. He's like, "Hey, Emmy, do you mind if I pass this along to a friend of mine who would be riveted to hear your story?" And so the book proposal had sample chapters. It did not have the whole manuscript, obviously. But then Alex Fumero called me and said, "Hey, would you like to do a podcast? I see something really, really good here, and it could be a great topics for a podcast." So I thought about it, because being a podcaster, even being a writer, was not something that was in my horizon. Like, I did not ever see that, me becoming that. So I thought about it, and I was very nervous. And I said, you know what? Sure, let's do it. You know, one of my mentors always taught me, when the universe presents you with opportunities, always say yes.
Tell the universe yes. I love that. Elle Nash gave us some tips for editing yourself.
It really was just kind of like me on my own, trying to figure it out and figure out the structure. And I did a big editing process. I would like make note cards for each chapter, trying to make sense of it, print it out, try and move stuff around in the way that I needed. And then even like editing it from backwards to the front, like starting with the last chapter and working backwards to make sure that everything made sense and that kind of thing.
Elle also dropped this brilliant little nugget about structure.
I think the biggest deciding factor for me in how anything is structured comes down to how close you are to the person's like psychic experience. So like I think about that term a lot, psychic distance, and it's like, how far away are you from this character? I sometimes find it really hard to enjoy third person, because in a lot of third person stories, I tend to just feel too distant from the narrator or the character that like I'm reading about. And like, I want to like feel close to them. I want to like forget that like I'm a person. I want to be experiencing this character as close as I can. So I think like that's a big thing I think about is when I'm structuring something is like, how can I make sure that we are as close as possible to that experience and that there isn't distance, that we're not putting like obstacles between like reader and like atmosphere or reader and like experience.
And she left us with this publishing advice.
One tip for writers trying to get a book published.
I would say don't spray and pray when it comes to doing queries, but also the number one predictor of success in publication is perseverance. It's not talent.
Caroline Shannon-Karasik honestly changed the game for me. She shared what she learned from revising her memoir in progress, and it blew my mind.
It's kind of letting that old stuff sit somewhere else and generate new stuff with and pretend like that doesn't exist, because it's really challenging when you already have something that's formatted and then trying to go in it and just like plunk things in that you now want to rewrite. So I'm trying to do the research and then get into my like cut it up and put it on the floor phase and see where things puzzle in. Because for a long time, I kept looking at the manuscript as it was and thinking, how do I rewrite this? How do I begin to really put this new overlay on it? And it was just messing me up because I couldn't get out of that.
That's so smart.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
God damn it. I'm like, okay, maybe I need to think about that myself.
Yeah. It was just really tripping me up. I just couldn't get away from that voice and thinking that it had to just even exist at all. Like, who's to say that even those pieces will end up, a lot of the pieces that I, cut up and lay out will fit anymore. I don't know. And so that was my biggest challenge, was just like putting that aside and allowing myself to create new material without worrying that what I already created may or may not be lost. Because I think we like attach in that way. And it's like, well, but what if it doesn't fit, And it's like, well, it doesn't fit, I guess, And so that has allowed me to move forward in this. Also really like separating my research and my generative, weeks or phases or whatever, like just doing a ton of research and allowing myself to do what sometimes we're like, I'm doing research, and it's like, well, technically I'm avoiding writing, but I actually do need to do this research. Right. And so giving myself that opportunity too, and not feeling like that wasn't writing has been, I'm very like, strict about those types of things, and just giving myself that freedom to just read and research and think about how like the tiniest line from a book about, animal pain can somehow fit in this giant manuscript that I'm, trying to create.
Nanadekwa Sekyiamah gave us her inspiring story about how she leveraged her blog into a book deal.
So I came from the holiday thinking, like, why has it taken me so long to feel like I can have this kind of community that has this really positive attitude about sex? And, I felt inspired that I wanted to start a blog about sex. So I rang up one of my very good friends, Malika Grant. She lived in the States at the time. And I said to her, let's do a blog and later on we can turn it into a book. And that's what we did. Like, she also wrote 2 series that she started on the blog that became books. So we both have, in a sense, books that have been inspired by some of the writing we've been doing on the blog.
And offered insight into how transcribing interviews herself actually helped her find each story.
Because sometimes in transcribing, I would literally hear something that I hadn't quite heard when we had the conversation, or hadn't quite sank in. So I could go back and like have a second conversation. And also in transcribing, I would also hear what, in a sense, was the most interesting parts of the story. So that is when the crafting of the story would come to me.
Nana also left us with these gentle reminders that can be so necessary at times.
What is one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
Maybe just to have more confidence in myself and just to trust that I am a writer and that I just need to persevere and work at it, and that my dreams will come true.
Oh, yes. What's one tip for writers trying to get a book published?
Make writer friends. Just really, I think community is everything, right? just make writer friends and be happy for them when they do well and support them, because your own time will come.
Omar Mouallem gave a powerful sermon on the importance of fact-checking.
I mean, I believe that fact-checking should be done independently of the writer. But if I didn't have the money for that, and if the publishers didn't have the resources for that, I would have to do it myself. A book with a topic this sensitive, I would not be able to, I just wouldn't be able to sleep. And look, there were errors.
Really?
In every chapter. Of course. I've been a fact checker. I know that there has never been an article. I think there's never been an article that I fact checked over, say, 500 words that did not have an error in it. Everything has an error in it. Everything that hasn't been fact checked has errors in it. I can say this categorically because I've seen it. I know it.
He also reminded us not to sweat comps when it comes to book proposals. Okay, one tip for writers trying to get a book published.
I think in the book proposal process, try not to get caught up in the comps part of it, which is like the comparative books. This is a nonfiction thing, but I also think that when you're putting together a proposal or a query letter with a novel or a work of fiction, the publishers expect you to compare them to other books and kind of make a case for why the market deserves your book or wants your book. And it is just, the reality is the market is a crapshoot, right? And nobody can really predict what's going to be a successful book or not from comparative titles. And, the creative nonfiction writers that I work with at King's University here, this is the thing that causes them the most amount of anxiety. And I'm here to tell you it's probably the least, should I say the least? It's one of the least important parts of your book proposal, in my experience. And I say this because I didn't have comps in my book proposal, and that book sold. So don't get caught up in it. It's good to have, but don't stress about it. Don't overthink it.
I loved this example from Shelby Hinte about addressing feedback in your own voice.
So I did a whole rewrite of the book with that kind of in my head, sound like yourself, sound like your writing voice, and then fix these problems. And it was a really fun experience. It was really cool to go through. And so now I just finished a draft last week, and I'm actually swapping with 2 other writers this week. The experience was so fun that I would like to think if you're having that much fun writing, it's not totally terrible.
Shelby really inspired me in terms of learning what kind of writing process works for you and then protecting that as much as you can.
I think because I wrote that from beginning to end without sharing it with anyone until I had 2 drafts, which was very different than writing a book while you're in grad school where you have to turn in chunks.
Right.
I'll never do that again. I don't like having other people's voices in my head when I write. I feel like I was resolving problems in this book before I had gotten to the end. Whereas with the second book around 1, I like to think maybe I know a little bit more what I'm doing, though it all still sort of feels elusive. But yeah, I didn't share even a page with anyone for the first 2 drafts. And so I feel like I was able to resolve a lot more problems on my own in my own voice. So now I'm sure there's a whole list of other problems, but at least the plot is solid, which was not the case the first time around with my current book.
Oh, that's really interesting. What have you learned about your writing process while working on this project?
I mean, I think definitely that I'm a person who has to do it most days a week. If I get too far away from it, it ends up feeling really scary to me. But if I can do, even just 30 minutes a day, but ideally an hour a day, 5 or 6 days a week, then it doesn't become something bigger than it is. So I do like to have I'm pretty strict with myself about daily practice, but also the fun element. I have to really work super hard not to think about other people while I'm in draft mode. I definitely have people I am writing to, people who I'm oh, I can't wait for them to read this and they're gonna laugh at this joke or whatever. And that really helps me with voice stuff. But in terms of publishing, I have to really not think at all about what's gonna happen next. Otherwise it becomes just unbearable, like not fun. And I write because I think it is a super enjoyable activity and I don't want to like corrupt it.
Totally.
And that is the perfect way to end the first ever Bleeders Anthology. Thank you so much to Shelby and all of today's writers for psyching us up, reminding us of our self-worth, and offering your best writing and publishing advice. We appreciate you so much. And if you listeners liked what you heard, make sure you go back and listen to the full episodes with all of these wonderful folks if you haven't already. And that is it for this edition of The Bleeders. Thank you so much for joining me. I think we can all agree writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak, and hey, let's connect on social media. I am at Courtney Kosak, Kosak, on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack. I send out a lot of fun stuff on there. The link is in the episode description. And join me again in 2 weeks for another episode. In the meantime, happy bleeding!